and I will hand things over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Philippa. I'm Andrea Honigsveld.
I'm Maria Dove.
And I'm Carrie McDermott Goldman.
And we are going to be ready to share our screen and get started on our presentation, which we slightly adjusted to focus even more on the theme of the conference, so equity strategies for justice in support of multilingual learners. And we're very excited to be here. We also want to recognize that Dr. Audrey Cohen contributed to the development of this presentation, but she can't be here with us today. We're all professors at Molloy College, and if you have never heard of Molloy, it's because we're the best kept secret of Long Island, New York. And we're all affiliated either with the master's program in Tesol or the EDD program, which is designed to focus on social justice and equity. So when we saw the conference theme, we thought that it would be quite fitting for us to try to submit a proposal and be part of this wonderful event.
And as you can see on this map, this little happy face here, that is where Molloy College is nestled on Long Island, and we are the best kept secret there. And I just want to mention that our master's program in Tesol will be moving fully online, hopefully by next fall. So anybody that you might know that would be interested, we'd love you to send them our way, as well as our way for our EDD program.
Thank you.
So we want to give a special thanks to our publishers, Corwin Press. Our editor is Dan Alpert, as well as our colleague who could not be with us today, Dr. Audrey Cohen, and our fabulous illustrator, Clarabelle Gonzalez.
We would also like to share with you that we have donated a copy of this book, so it will be included in the raffle at the end of the conference.
To get us started today, we'd love to hear from all of you. So if you could please introduce yourselves in the chat and identify your two Ps, personally or within your institution, your position and your passion. What are these? We'd love to hear from you.
So if I were to introduce myself, I would say that I'm the Associate Dean and Director of a doctoral program, and I'm very, very passionate about multilingual learners, multilingualism, anything that has to be with language pedagogy. And we're looking forward to seeing your answers in the chat. How about you, Carrie and Maria? How would you introduce yourself with two Ps?
Well, I would say that I am a professor in the School of Education and Human Services, really with the focus on teaching new teachers in the field of Tesol. And my passion is new teachers and guiding them toward being the best they can be for the sake of our English learners.
And if I were to introduce myself, my position is Associate Professor and Coordinator of Graduate Tesol and Bilingual Programs at Molloy College. And my passion is really making incremental change in the way we do things in the classroom to really think about diversity and equity for all of our learners.
Thank you, Kaylin, for starting us off by introducing yourself. So we're hoping that a few other people will also share about their backgrounds and what your passions are. All right, all the answers are coming in. So we are so very happy to see new names and some familiar colleagues and friends. So honored that you are all here today with us, unpacking dimensions of equity for multilingual learners. All right, thank you. So keep them coming. We will scroll up and down and get a little bit more familiar with your backgrounds, with your interests as we proceed.
So during this webinar, here is what we hope to accomplish. We want to define equity work in the post-pandemic classroom, particularly for the sake of multilingual learners. We're going to explore the 4 essential strategies that are in our book, From Equity Insights to Action, and to support those equitable learning opportunities for our students, as well as apply the strategies to our own context through reflection and and responding in the chat.
And these are the essential questions that we'd like you to focus on as we have our discussion today. What drives you to pursue equity for your L's and your M's in your daily work? What does that really mean? What are you seeing? And how can we transform our classrooms? And how have we started doing that work already? What is your why? What does it mean to you? What's your passion with your why? And what are some of the impactful hows? How do we really impact our students? And how do we impact how their success really reaches far beyond our classroom walls? And how do we really connect with them and make a difference?
So we'd like to engage you in our first question, which is, what's the most urgent challenge in this, school year in your context? So in your institution or working with adult learners even, what does it mean to really move forward in this post-pandemic world of ours? So think about these possible ideas on the slide as possible challenges. And if there might be others that we didn't think of, you can also mention those as well. So please engage with us by writing your answer in the chat box. So Kaylin right away talking about the impact on social emotional well-being. That seems to be in the forefront. Yvette is mentioning it. Nasreen, thank you so much. Also, retention of underserved students, actually getting students to continue to commit to their studies is critical. Karen moved out of our ideas and thinking about technical literacy and food insecurity. Those are critical issues. And wanting to teach students to recognize inequality in the workplace and advocate for themselves. So very important with our adult learners. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your concerns, the urgent challenges that you are facing. One urgent challenge that we would like to also highlight is the notion of deficit thinking. When we talk about COVID slide or learning loss, or where that dominates the discourse around what can we do next, we're going to be possibly or dangerously tracking our multilingual learners into long-term remediation. If we're looking to the past and identifying gaps rather than looking to the future and identifying ways to accelerate learning, it's going to have an impact on our pedagogy and policy as well. And as many of you have already identified many different ways with commenting or adding that number 5 from the previous slide, any kind of deficit thinking or damage-oriented thinking may also significantly impact our students' self-concept, their social emotional well-being, so their self-efficacy. So it's really important for us to have an asset-based approach to whatever we're doing on the other side of the pandemic. And I also wanted to highlight for you that as early as in 2016, and you could please put a quick yes or no, a Y or an N, if you're familiar with this best kept secret of the US Department of Education, is the Newcomer Toolkit that was published as a PDF document, freely accessible online. And what you see here is a really brilliant mind map type of summary of what kinds of core stressors our immigrant families have always experienced. Now, let's just add on the trauma and the crisis and the inequities and the injustices that have been uncovered, or just as former President Obama said, the curtain was pulled back on these injustices and inequities because of COVID. So in the chat box, we of course see educators who are familiar with this document. It's a really, really critical document.
So here's our next question. What have been the most critical during and post-COVID experiences for your multilingual learners? So what do you see as being the most critical experiences for your students now that we're moving forward away from, hopefully, the pandemic experiences in the past? So what is happening with your students? Think about these and maybe possibly others and share with us in the chat box.
So even though we acknowledge the trauma and the crisis and many of the tragedies that our students and all of us have experienced, we're inviting you now to think about some of those silver linings, some of those assets-based thinking that are also possible because of COVID.
And when we think about COVID, we need to consider the idea that prior to COVID, we were very different people as educators. And now that we are moving toward the other side, we're very different as well in the classroom and with our encounters with students. And our students are very different people as well. So when we think about the lessons that they've learned throughout this time, what are we seeing? What are the benefits?
And interesting, of course, there's a difference between our public school students, our K-12 students, and our adult learners that have other concerns and other experiences as multilingual learners.
I'm seeing all the numbers listed. Thank you so much for your wonderful participation, both adding new ideas as Amanda did and others. Thank you, Helene, for opening up new pathways for learning with your addition, and for Karen reminding us that those multilingual learners, those adult learners who are in the workforce, many are frontline workers, so they're going to be continue to strive to survive. So we wanted to share with you a very, very powerful quote from Arundhati Roy, renowned Indian novelist, who wrote an essay about COVID's impact in India in about the end of 2020 in the Atlantic magazine. This is what she said. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So when we read this quote, that became the seed of our entire book. We started having a conversation about the powerful words that Arundhati Roy used and the extremely powerful metaphor of a portal being the in-between place and time that we're experiencing right now. And Maria, Carrie, and Audrey, who's not here with us, and Claribel, our amazing ENL teacher, illustrator, we were all talking about what if there was an educational portal?
So when we think about this transition, this movement from one world almost to the next, where we are maybe not dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and not bringing with us that burdensome luggage along with us, we want to think about what are those things that we're leaving behind? What shouldn't be brought with us along the way through the portal into the new world for working with our English learners? So share with us, what are you going to leave behind?
And you could immediately see the beautiful illustration we keep referring to. This is Claribel Gonzalez's sketch note, pretty much capturing our entire book on a page. But let's focus on what Maria said. What should we leave behind? Inspired by Arundhati Roy's quote or our presentation so far, what is something we should definitely not bring with us into a post-pandemic world? pedagogically, philosophically, just on any possible level. Thank you, Caitlin. Caitlin is going to have the door prize here, I think. Always answering right there first, rigid models of class formats and schedules.
Sharon just mentioned being nitpicky about anything, and I think we're beyond the pettiness. I think we've really moved away from that type of examination of annoyances, and really looking at the big picture and what we really truly have an opportunity to move forward within the portal.
We've moved forward, and as we're entering this new space, I'd like you to think about those wonderful things that we've done a great deal of work on, those practices that really make sense for our students, and it travels over into other areas where we are embracing our differences and really embracing equity. What are some of those things that we're taking with us as we go?
We're inviting you to enter that portal with us and think through this metaphor. I think this might be, Nazreen answer might still be on the previous slide, which is what to leave behind, the prescriptive kind of teaching and stop being judgmental, see student work beyond grammatical errors is what we want to see. So you answered both slides, if I interpreted correctly.
And Kimberly is chiming in, mentioning better understandings of students' home contexts, which I think is very, very important as we move forward. And really understanding what those contexts look like within that pandemic and how they're bringing that to us in the classroom.
I love the way Sharon is focusing on forgiveness and kindness. I mean, we came through a time that was very difficult, and I think we need a kinder, gentler time, particularly in our schools.
And I love the mention of strengthening classroom community. I think that's a huge part of what we do and what we need to continue doing, what we strive for.
Beautiful. So many answers that are aligned to our thinking as well, from community building to creativity, flexibility, compassion, lots of social emotional support that's needed. So thank you so much, everyone, for playing along with us through this metaphor, which became the core, the seed of the entire book that we have written and introduced our 4 equity strategies in this book. Each of these equity strategies is unpacked in an entire chapter, and here they are: amplifying the talents, spirits, and personal powers of multilingual learners, recalibrating, that would be your who, recalibrating the curriculum to accelerate learning for our students, that's the what, teaching and assessing to build student autonomy, agency, and resilience is the how, and last but definitely not least, bringing the whole book together, the whole framework together, by offering practical suggestions on how to continue to harness the power of connections and relationships. And one more huge shout out to Claribel Gonzalez, who is the incredible artist supporting this book. So we wanted to ask you immediately, and we always take an asset-based approach. In the chat box, please jot down the number or numbers of these 4 strategies that we just introduced that give you affirmations. In other words, we're giving you bragging rights. We want to celebrate you intuitively, intentionally. What have you already done for your students, especially since we came back from remote learning? So just the number or the numbers, or anything else that you feel was critical that you have been able to achieve in support of your students. What was that? Yes, this session is getting recorded, and we're definitely sharing this presentation. So Maria asked, whether we're going to be sharing this by all means. So let's see any other answers coming in. We really, really want to celebrate you. So thank you so much, Amanda. 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, Sharon, so happy to see that all of these strategies are affirming your own practice. I'm seeing 4s, the power of connections and relationships are just so important. And some of you are adding, Ari is adding number 2, re-examining, recalibrating, reconsidering your curriculum, and rather than focusing on remediation, focusing on acceleration. Thank you, Nazreen, Yvette, Maria, everyone who's been participating in the chat box. We really appreciate your wittedness, that you're thinking along these lines with us. So what we're going to do next, we're going to introduce our whys in 2 ways. So we're going to revisit the 4 key strategies that we just presented to you, and we're going to offer you our rationale. What's the purpose of this particular strategy? And then also another kind of why, which is why does it matter? What is the importance of that particular strategy? And then we're offering some concrete examples for you. So here is the first one. When we amplify the talents, spirits, and personal powers of our multilingual learners, we intentionally affirm each and every one of them, and we focus on the assets and the strengths rather than the deficiencies or any kind of gaps or anything that is not there yet in our students. And when we do so, our students must feel more valued, more affirmed. They feel that they are seen and heard and recognized and appreciated for who they are and not who they could have, should have, or would have been if they spoke English. So here's an example. What does it look like? Well, WIDA came out with the new standards in 2020, and you could see an example of a student portrait that focuses on not just test scores and some basic demographic information, but it also recognizes the student's special talents, interests, a quote from the student, and all those can-do indicators that outline what the child can do linguistically. Here's another example from Illinois, where entering Country Meadows School, this bulletin board welcomes us, and we could see how all the languages that are spoken in the building are celebrated and recognized. And there are many, many more examples, of course, in our book and in the country, all around the United States. So we're just going to continue by offering our why and some examples. So passing it on to you, Maria.
Here's the next one. It's recalibrate the curriculum to accelerate learning for multilingual learners. So what's the purpose of this? We really need to examine the curriculum, make sure that it's revised in a way that includes our multilingual learners' experiences, their cultural perspectives, their worldviews. And interestingly enough, we cannot just look, revise, and like one and done. We have to keep revising the curriculum because our students are always changing. So we want to make sure that the curriculum reflects the student body that we're teaching. And why does it matter? Oops, sorry. That's okay. Well, multilingual learners need to have access to culturally and historically and linguistically responsive, sustaining, integrated curricula. All right. So the next slide really illustrates one idea, which is to have a curriculum audit. Now, what is the purpose of a curriculum audit? Curriculum audit really helps to make sure that all groups of students are served well academically by the school's practices, pedagogy, the lesson delivery, the actual books and materials that are being used in classes. And we also have to ensure that there are equitable practices so that every student has an opportunity to learn and also to demonstrate their learning. Here is another example of recalibrating the curriculum, and this happened to be a visit we had to a classroom in Prince William County schools at Westgate Elementary. And we loved this lesson. It was a co-taught science lesson in 5th grade. And there were a large group of newcomers. I believe it was about 8, if I recall correctly. And what we noticed was that all of these stations were set up for different students to explore the topic, which was mixtures and solutions. And what was wonderful is that the newcomer group stayed together with one teacher while the other teacher circulated between the other students to make sure they were on track for their work. But what was really very telling about how this school managed the curriculum was that they made sure that all students, no matter what their language proficiency, were really on target in the content area curriculum that was grade appropriate and rigorous, yet they were still able to understand the lesson and also demonstrate what they knew, even though their language skills in English were minimal. The next equity strategy is to teach and assess to build student autonomy, agency, and resilience. And the purpose of this is to make sure that all multilingual learners have access to learning experiences that support their independence and are assessed fairly and equitably. We have to make sure that English learners, multilingual learners, experience an integrated approach, just almost like the example previously, to learning both content and language and developing their literacy and social emotional skills.
So here are a couple of examples of what it might look like. If you see on the left-hand side, Mrs. Holtkamp and Mrs. Boschnack modeled for their students how to write what-if poems and how to think creatively and critically about the world, and then change one or two of these what-ifs into research, collaborative research opportunities for the students. So the students had more ownership of their learning. Everybody had a voice, a place in defining what they would like to explore and learn about. On the right-hand side, you see two photographs. These were taken prior to COVID. That's why the children are not wearing masks. But what's really evident in these images is how the students are supporting each other's learning, how the teachers have created a community of learners. The triad functions beautifully for students who either can form a bilingual peer bridge, or two students who might be leading more of the discussion, while the third student might be more on the receptive end, but learning from his or her classmates. The line up and fold structure, or the conga line in the lower right corner, indicates how the students exchange ideas. The girl in the red shirt can go to the back of the line. Everybody moves one person down. So we're still practicing the absolute critical language pedagogy of multiple meaningful exposure and repetition to content and language, while at the same time we also build classroom community in which everybody can work with everybody else. And here is another example where you could literally see how the children are engaged in collaborative work, in pair work. On the left-hand side, an English speaker and an English learner collaboratively conduct some experiments that they will have to then capture on a note catcher. And on the right-hand side, again, a newcomer contributing her ideas by pointing or by sharing in her native language, while the girl on the right-hand side is able to capture their shared understanding on an exit slip. So fair and equitable assessment practices and joint paired learning opportunities will be absolutely critical to continue post-pandemic.
When we spoke earlier, we were talking a little bit about connections and relationships and really building that with our students. And when we think about the purpose of this, how do we create these safe environments where students are able to be healthy and involved and participatory within whatever it is that we're doing in the classroom? And that really comes down to how we connect with them, how we build relationships, how we really understand who they are, their backgrounds, where they're coming from, and how we can really support them in whatever it is that they have going on, because we have to think about really working with the whole child. There's so much more than what we're seeing right in front of us. And this matters because we want students to feel like they're visible. We want them to be seen. We want them to be heard, and we want them to be part of something. And our kids want to be part of something, and sometimes they don't necessarily feel like they are. So those connections mean everything to what we do in the classroom. Here are some images to kind of show what this really looks like and what we're seeing outside in the field. In the upper left corner, we can see the teacher is really working with students as they're preparing a presentation. And he's really working with them, trying to identify what it is that they need to share and helping them feel comfortable in doing so. And some of the other images where students, you can see, feel very comfortable learning and engaging with materials. You can see the young girls on the right-hand side laying down, working through the material and understanding what's happening. The teacher in the middle is really focused on whether or not the student is comprehending all that information. And we really need to think about, how do we pull them into what we're doing? How do we focus on asset-based instruction and build relationships to help them feel supported throughout that process?
Carrie, did you want to take this one?
Sure. When we think about this, how are we moving forward? Where will we start in the process? So we talked a little bit earlier about the portal. And what are some of those things that we're bringing forward with us? What are those strategies? What are those things that we're bringing? And I'd like you to think about these 4 points again: amplifying the talents and spirits and personal powers of our multilingual learners. How are we recalibrating the curriculum? How are we teaching and assessing students to build autonomy, agency, and resilience? And how are we building and harnessing the power of connections and relationships? In the chat box, if you could just write a number down or several numbers down of how you plan to move forward as we start to get on the other side of this pandemic.
Previously, we asked you to affirm your practice. Now we're asking you to identify an area of growth, an area of need, an area of focus. Where would you go next with your practice, even if that's already part of your practice? So Kaylin started us off again with number 3. Okay. And this is just a reflective opportunity for us to always circle back what we're doing well already, but what else can we do better? Where could we focus our attention? So thank you so much to all of you who have participated and shared your own experiences through the chat box. Thank you, Karen. Connect, connect, connect. That's it. So we could have started with chapter 5, which is strategy 4, because that is the sort of an umbrella concept that is interwoven in the entire publication and our entire framework. And another way that we could invite you to think about this, and this could be hopefully a post-conference reflective next step for you, is an action planning tool that we designed. So in a professional development session, if you do some kind of turnkey training, we could ask you to ask your colleagues to jot down past practices that were impactful, that were successful. We don't want to do away with them. We definitely want to retain them. Then let's focus on pandemic practices. What happened during the past year and a half? How have your teaching practices evolved? What have you done more of? What were some success stories there? Then capture the moment. What is in the present right now, as we are sort of in between? We're still going through this portal, but what are some practices that are working right now? Taking that positive asset-based approach, and then set goals for the future after you and your colleagues have collaboratively reflected on all of the past, present, and possible future practices in support of equitable education for multilingual learners.
Carrie, you have to unmute.
Yes, there is an urgency for us to reflect on and collectively amend the impact of this pandemic on multilingual families, but not lose sight of the inner strengths, resilience, and perseverance that our students have gained.
Thank you. I think that's from your chapter that you wrote, right?
Yes.
It sounds like it's from chapter 5. Well, we're so very honored that you chose to be here with us. We wanted to give you our email addresses, all at Molloy College, very easy, first initial, last name at molloy.edu. And we actually have quite some time to engage in a dialogue, in conversation. So we're going to stop the share. And Philippa, were there any questions that you noted in the chat box or any reflections that you would like to share?
No, I have not noticed any questions because you have done a wonderful job of keeping on top of the chat box. I feel that I just got to sit back and enjoy. So it's really open to anyone with any questions, either spoken or if you would rather put it in the chat box, that's great. Whatever works for you.
Or any comments? Sometimes when we do any kind of professional learning work with teachers, educators, administrators, 2 ways to anchor that conversation in a non-judgmental, non-evaluative way that Maria and I have developed, and Carrie practices this a lot too, is noticings and wonderings. What have you noticed in your own environment, in your own context? What kind of inequities have you noticed? And wonderings are, what are you wondering about as possible next step? Who is going to be your ally, or as Bettina Love says, your co-conspirator, to make sure that you're going to be working towards dismantling those inequities? And you could be wondering about the what are the causes, and what are some next steps to address inequities, and always the how. Just as earlier we introduced the entire framework for our work together as a team, to always put the students first, then digging deeper into the what, and then addressing the practical applications of the how. Helene, yay, you raised your hand. Go ahead. We would love to engage in a conversation with you and anybody else. Thank you.
Realize what I was going to look like this. Okay. Well, I don't teach multilingual learners, although actually some of my students are. But I'm in teacher education, and what I've noticed is, you were talking about the curriculum. You have to retool, revise your curriculum. I've had to do that because my teacher candidates are under so much stress in their field sites. And when they come to the seminars with me, they don't want to talk about lesson planning and pedagogy, or they want to talk about their socio-emotional experiences dealing with the families of the multilingual learners in their schools. And so I've had to shift the focus of my courses for them much more to the affective piece than they originally had been, which I think isn't a bad thing, right? So I've been watching that process happen. And that's what I think, if I'm looking at your action planning, I'm going right across the 4 boxes. So I just thought I would add from my context what's happening.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
It reminded me of, I work with students in the field as well, my student teachers. And what I'm seeing is they are overwhelmed in many respects, as well as now they're in classrooms where their cooperating teachers are seeing their students as being, maybe very needy. And due to this they're talking about learning loss and COVID slide. And I have first graders now that I'm observing that are doing kindergarten work, beginning kindergarten work. And I'm like shaking when I see it, because it's really thinking that, well, they missed so much. And, 5 of our students didn't even go to kindergarten. And all of this talk about learning loss instead of being, having this forward thinking. So really thinking about what the students need and having those high expectations. It seems that high expectations and thinking about students as empty vessels has been more of what's going on. And it's really troubling for our students.
So we'd like to invite anybody else. Okay, thank you, Karen, about collaboration with the artists. Hope this is not off topic. Not at all. We're so very excited that you're actually asking about Claribel Gonzalez. So I'm going to go back to that slide and give her an amazing shout out, because we can tell you the story, how we got to know Claribel, who she is. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, she's unable to join us today. But here is the slide where we're giving her a shout out. So recognizing her talent, as we promised in chapter 1 as well. So Claribel Gonzalez, let me just see if I can very quickly share the slideshow. Here we go. So Claribel is an ENL, English as a New Language teacher, and TOSA actually teacher on special assignment in Buffalo, New York. And years ago, we discovered Claribel on Twitter because she started tweeting about our other books, our previous publications, by capturing entire chapters or entire books on a single one-page sketch note. And then she also attended some of our webinars that we offered. And there was Claribel again, just so artistically and so brilliantly capturing the essential ideas that we just thought, who is she? How can we get in touch with her? And then we did. And then as we were getting into a new book, we approached our publisher, Corwin Press, which has not been done before. At least we don't know too many professional books that would have extensive full color sketch notes. So we said to our publisher that, well, we would like to invite Claribel to join us, both conceptually and artistically, so that we could not just illustrate, not just to put a pretty picture into each of the 5 chapters, but to invite her to sift through the key ideas and then reconceptualize our core message in an artistic way and actually practice what we preach, which is amplifying the talent, spirits, and personal powers of a formal multilingual learner. And that's how we met Claribel, and she so graciously agreed to do this. She works digitally. She has a very large tablet that she works on, and she shared with us her process. And it was just an absolute delight to get to know her, to work with her. So now she's part of several upcoming publications as well. So it's going to be a long-term partnership with Claribel. We're very, very grateful for this connection with her. So thank you for that question. Absolutely. So that's the story of our collaboration.
And what was wonderful about being with Claribel is she's in the trenches with working with multilingual learners. So she brought even more to the table than just her artistic talents.
Absolutely.
And this was something that she did as a child when she was learning new material, that she took these things to summarize chapters on her own, and they really helped her develop her language. And that was a really amazing thing to hear as well.
All right. Any other questions or comments, or just what you're wondering about? So Karen, this was a beautiful example of exactly what I was sharing with you, is what are you noticing? What are you wondering? So thank you for sharing your curiosity about how these illustrations came about, or why you would have an illustration in a professional publication.
I had a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
It's not on the topic of equity regarding the pandemic, but kind of the bigger picture of equity with EL students. Do you have any tips or thoughts on how to get EL students into honors track in high school? They tend to just be placed in college prep classes that are not preparing them for college. Do you have any tips on that, getting them tracked into honors classes and such?
I have one really important recommendation that a lot of schools that we worked with took us up on that recommendation, which is the ESL, ELL, ELD department to work very closely with the guidance counselor. So that if you have a designated guidance counselor, rather than the English learners being dispersed to all the available high school guidance counselors, if you have one person who is, especially somebody who is sort of handpicked, somebody who is also an advocate and really familiar with this population and has that kind of asset-based philosophy, all you need is a good, strong partnership with that person, because the guidance counselors, social workers, psychologists, often we don't recognize how important their roles are when it comes to decisions that we as educators make about our students. So the second recommendation is really advocacy around gifted and talented programs. Often very early on, elementary, middle school, the English learners are left out automatically. They're not even being tested for gifted education. So early on, starting to recognize the giftedness, the multi-talented personalities that come into our schools, rather than, again, looking at the deficiency and immediately tracking that those kids were not going to be even considered for gifted programs or for, as you get to the high school level, more advanced classes. The third recommendation, of course, is that all teachers are teachers of academic language. So it's not just the ELD teachers, the ESL teachers' job to focus on academic language and literacy. But if there's a huge culture shift where every teacher embraces academic language and literacy or disciplinary literacy, then they're no longer going to see the deficiency, but they will see the opportunity of connecting language, literacy, and content. I know I said a lot. Sorry if Maria and Carrie, please add more to it, because this is a topic I'm very, very passionate about as an English learner, multilingual learner myself. That how do you go beyond hearing the accent or hearing mispronounced words or hearing those grammatical errors and looking for the message rather than some of those identified issues?
So we have approximately 1 minute left. So I'm just in my role as time taskmaster. I feel I have to tell you this.
And Karen dropped in a very important suggestion too. Peer and student ambassadors could be another avenue. So mentorship is yet another one, definitely. Peer mentorship, teacher mentorship. But the most important is the guidance counselors, how these children are tracked, where are they going to be? Carrie, I think you have 10 years of secondary experience, so.
Yes, and I would agree with everything that Andrea mentioned. I think the advocacy is a big piece of that. And it's also a shift away from deficit thinking. But that's a school-wide, district-wide type of thing. And really moving away from thinking about where those deficits are and really focusing on where students can go and how far they can go to succeed, and really changing the viewpoints of the teachers. And a lot of that comes from, cultural competency. How are teachers instructed on how to really think about what our students are capable of doing? And every student is capable, how do we reach them? And so that the guidance counselor is a huge piece. And I also think that their structure with how they work with social workers, because a lot of times the social workers know more about the home life and know more about what's happening there, and they can give a lot more insight to the guidance counselor, even if they're not able to fully get a good picture of what's happening. Because in some of the districts that we're working with, they're very, very large. and there are several English learners, and sometimes it's not as easy to get to know in depth everything that's going on with those students. And so really having those partnerships and that collaborative, discussion, and administration needs to be a big part of that. They need to be on board, and administrators really a lot of times dictate what's happening in the school. And so they need to be partnered there as well.
So I think with that, unfortunately, we're going to have to, we will have to end. Thank you so much, Andrea, Maria, and Carrie. This was really interesting, and I personally especially found the issues of advocacy and moving away from the idea of deficits really, really thought-provoking. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm muted. Gotta do that at least once at conference, right? Thank you. I think I'm host next for this room, so you can go ahead and transfer
All right.
that over.
Okay, let me see, where am I here? Move to. Oh.
Oh, and you can stop recording and I'll restart it.
Right. Oh, God, yes.